Hey, what's up, Instagram? What day is it? I think it's Wednesday. Wednesday, April 29th, day 403 of the lockdown. Just kidding. It's only been a month or so, but it seems like a long time. Doesn't it? Doesn't it seem like a long time? You like my Dead and Company hat? This is a Dead and Company. I love the Grateful Dead. I love the Dead and Company. I got this hat in Mexico when Sarah and I went down there and checked them out in January, playing in the sand. I highly recommend downloading any Dead and Company you can find, or any Grateful Dead for that matter, because it just sets you right. So yeah, today, beautiful day here in Richmond, Virginia. And we're supposed to get a monsoon tomorrow. Big, heavy rain. So nap time, quarantine nap time. Let's see. What have we been talking about this week? We've had some good people on this week. We had Goldie, Julia Sharp on Richard Appel wants to know, how do I ask to join live? Well, there should be some sort of indicator on your screen that says ask to join conversation, something like that. You'll figure it out. You went to Harvard Law School, but you are old. So, yeah, we had Goldie on Monday. I'm trusting Rich is going to figure this out in a second. We had Goldie talking about his hilarious journey into showbiz. Then we had Jamie Kennedy last night, another hilarious journey into showbiz. Tonight, Rich will have his own hilarious journey, which is a cool one, and I'll let him tell the story, or I'll prod him to tell it once he figures out how to join. And then tomorrow night, we've got the lovely Adrian Palicki and the very handsome and red-headed Scott Grimes will be joining. They co-star in the Orville, which will be, I guess, back in production whenever this thing lifts. They're producing season 3 right now. Oh, hey, J-Man 4241 wants a Cleveland voice, and I deliver. And I got a little scratchy throat. I have some of my dandelion tea. So Adrian and Scott will be on tomorrow night. I guess they'll be on the same camera, so we'll have some fun talking about showbiz. And then tonight, okay, I'm serious. I don't see that option. Gabe Appel, can you call your dad and tell him how to join this Insta conversation, or can someone scroll it up on there? All I know to do is to ask to join conversation. So I'm assuming you're watching me, Rich. Hello, Mr. Herbert. And there's got to be a button. Consuela, I got to warm up, Consuela. No. Oh, yeah, how do I invite him? Okay, so I can invite Rich to join. How do I do that? Do I do this? Oh, go live with, okay. All right, so where the hell is Rich Appel? I'm gonna have to scroll through until I see him, and I don't see him on this list. Boy, this is embarrassing. Got all these folks watching. Rich, scroll through comments and find the invite. I didn't punch in an invite. Is this an invite down here? I don't know what the hell that is. Wow. I'm going to punch that back down. Can you do the Cleveland voice if he was in a quarantine? Oh boy. Here we go again. Groundhog's Day. Groundhog's Day again. What day is it? What day is Groundhog Day? What's automatic, Kelly Hanna? I'm trying to add him. All I can hear is Cleveland. When you follow each other, follow me, Rich. There he is. We got this. Harvard Law School. And now, Rich Appel went to Harvard Law School. Figured out.
I'm there. I have to first start off by saying it was Kelly Hanna. Her comment.
All right.
Was the key.
Good.
Otherwise, I had no idea what I was doing.
Okay, so you have the anti-hair of me.
Well,
So
together we make two reasonably haired co-creators of the Cleveland Show.
There we go. And then Seth would be the third, I guess.
Exactly. Right
he
down
would
the
average
middle.
it out. So, so I was just rolling down your credits here. So you worked on The Simpsons, you worked on King of the Hill, you worked on Family Guy, American Dad, you co-created the Cleveland Show with me, and now you're running Family Guy. And that's just my intro. So
yes,
that's not our conversation. So
there are many other credits, but I'll let those slip by.
Okay. Okay. No one wants to hear about
cares.
So you are in West Los Angeles, I assume?
That's correct.
All right. I'm in.
I like this. We're going to pretend Mike doesn't know me very well and know precise story.
No, I'm setting this up for people who don't know.
Okay. Yes, I'm in West Los Angeles.
Okay. And I'm in the west end of Richmond, Virginia. So, we've communicated from here to there many times. And so what I've been doing, as you may have caught some of these or not.
Yes.
I had Goldie on Friday or Monday night, and then Jamie Kennedy last night. I have Adrian Palicki and Scott Grimes on tomorrow. We've had Seth, Craig Robinson, a lot of folks, and John Viner. And we're just talking about
who?
Von Giner. TV's Von Giner. Yeah. So we've just been kind of talking about people's paths from early life to showbiz and beyond.
Well,
and,
I was at RISD and I sketched a little cartoon.
Okay.
And the next thing I know, it's $1 billion powerhouse.
Okay.
Now,
no, that was Seth.
That was Seth.
We just went along for the ride.
I had a roundabout way. I knew I wanted to write comedy or try to write comedy from the time I was 14. I remember my freshman year in high school.
Now, your dad was a funny guy, correct?
My dad was a very funny guy. He was an English professor and a writer, but had the driest and quickest wit of anyone I've known. And I always say that anything good I've done, I borrowed or stole from him, a whole attitude and outlook. And he would be the first to note that if he were still alive.
Hey, there you go. Yeah. That would be part of his charm.
So
wait a minute. So were you like a class clown at all, or just you were a smart guy? So were you a ride?
Humor always mattered to me, and I was going to say that is a caricature of a Laurel and Hardy movie, and Laurel and Hardy was the first movie I saw when I was 4 that my dad took me to, and so he introduced me to Laurel and Hardy, the Marx Brothers, all the Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, the comic stars, not even of his youth. I'm not sure why he was all obsessed with all those, but that was the beginning of my introduction to comedy. But if I'm really honest, I think my sense of humor developed because I am a pretty active, extroverted person, but you can't tell from me sitting here, I'm not as tall as the next person. And when I was in grade school and junior high, I was always kind of the shortest kid in the class. And it was a way, I think, instinctively to just sort of make sure I wasn't the butt of jokes. It worked somewhat successfully.
Right. Good. Hey, look behind me. Remember that?
There he is. Yes.
Yeah, that was in my office at the Cleveland Show.
Yeah. Mike was the only person who created a show in Hollywood, starred in a show in Hollywood, helped write a show in Hollywood, and yet lived in Richmond, Virginia. Right. He was always there for the press availabilities and the red carpets. And then when the rubber hit the road and we had to stay in editing till 11.
That's not true.
I'm kidding. Mike was there day in and day out.
I was there tons. And you were there always.
Yes.
Hey, family first, man. I had to come back. I had family reasons. So I did the Bi-Coastal Hustle for a number of years. But so when you were young,
I did the Bi-Coast. That's when, just to get back to how I started, when I had gone to law school, and then I became a prosecutor in New York. And my wife at the time, who's still a dear friend, was hugely encouraging because she knew I wanted to be a writer.
Right.
And on weekends and in early mornings while I was a prosecutor, I would write scripts, and sometimes at the office. And I knew that Shift F3 switched the screen from a legal brief to my Larry Sanders spec script which
Nice.
I was very adept at fooling everyone that I was always working on legal stuff. And then the first job I got was at The Simpsons, but it was a 10-week offer. Now that turned into 5 years, but for the first 20 weeks, it was 2 10-week terms. And so we kind of maintained our place in New York. And I basically, for the fall, I commuted back and forth.
And you had a young child at that point, right?
And then
Dave?
she and our then 6-week-old child were stationed in New York for the fall. And then they came out after Christmas and stayed till the following fall when he went back with his mom for the school year up till he was 5. And then, so I was doing that bi-coastal thing too. And I'll tell you that one of the first signs I felt of age was when I realized no more red eyes. I mean, if I had to do that with a second family, it would not work.
Yeah. Red eyes. I started flying back and forth every 2 or 3 weeks for years. And about a year into that, the red eye just went out the window. The red eye, it's just brutal. And you could at least fly direct. I would have to fly and connect somewhere at 5 in the morning and then get another plane at 7.
But I was flying coach.
Well, you, as you said before, you weren't as tall as the next guy. So
that's true too. It was never a bother.
And I was probably flying coach at that point too, to be honest with you. But so all right. So when you were little, now were you funny at school? Were you funny at home? Did you
Yes.
Did you write at all? Did you write for like the school paper, or did you?
Well, what happened is, and I remember it starting in 5th grade. I went to a new school. My best friend, his dad. This was back 5th grade, so 1974. And his dad worked at a company that had access to the Betamax, which was, back in the day, the first VHS tape player. No one had them. Few had even heard of them. And he had a video camera. And my friend and I would recreate verbatim the Saturday Night Live weekend updates. And we put like a picnic table. We put a sheet. We tried to get, visuals behind us. And we didn't. Eventually, we started to make up our own stuff. But for like at least a year, it was just trying to write down what happened on Saturday Night Live that we, lied about.
Because you couldn't record it.
We could.
Could you with that machine?
He could do it, but it had limitations on what it could record. But then we were then using it to shoot ourselves for an audience of 0. I mean, no one wanted to see these things except for us. Right. And so that's kind of the first I remember of taking it like seriously enough to think, oh, there's a script. And we'd watch Monty Python and we'd think what made, we'd try to deconstruct it. If we then wanted to rip off a Monty Python or an SNL, a Chevy Chase bit, we just, the script would be 80% plagiarized and then, 10% him and 10% me. And then in high school, I edited the yearbook. And the thing that was the most fun to me is I just turned the door to the yearbook office into a daily humor place where a couple of friends and I would just write things, put things, take photos, and then caption them. I would say, looking back on it, I'd say 40% of it was a little mean to our classmates, but at the time it all seemed, good-natured and fun. But I loved doing that. And then I continued to try to write comedy when I went to college. And then even when I was in law school, I was writing. It's just, I wasn't writing like a spec script because I thought that's useless, but I would write like what I thought was comic fiction and kept on deferring, what I really wanted to do. Just because I didn't have the short of it is I didn't really have the balls to give it a shot. I think I was a little insecure. And it was always a safe bet to fall back on something that would get, your parents or your friends to go, oh, you're at law school. Oh, you're a prosecutor. Yeah. And I was lucky enough, 2 of my good pals in college were Conan O'Brien and Greg Daniels, who went on to...
I don't know who either of those people are. Okay.
And Greg, just because Conan people obviously know the name of Greg, maybe they do, but Greg co-created King of the Hill, brought The Office to the U.S., co-created Parks and Rec. But beyond the 2 of them being successful, they're hugely talented and nice guys. And they took the leap after college and eventually got jobs in something called Not Necessarily the News, which was on HBO.
I remember that.
It was kind of like a weekend update.
Rich Hall, Sniglets was on that, I think, right?
And the thing
So,
I always remember and always tell people when they're, you know, worried about their jobs or if they lose a job, or Conan and Greg, and they would say this to themselves back then, every 3 weeks they'd be fired and then rehired because it was cheaper to start them anew. And when you think of the talent in that pretty cheap team to hire,
yeah.
and then they were unemployed. And then eventually they got jobs at SNL. And when I was a prosecutor downtown, they would often come on their off weeks to watch me in trial and really have that kind of grass is always greener.
Wow.
Like, you're doing something that matters. And then every once in a while, they'd get me tickets to go to SNL. And I say, this just blows that out of the water. I mean,
Yeah,
and that
So,
remains not that I ever could have gotten that job, but if there was ever a job that I think, boy, would that have been a great job, it would have been to be a writer on SNL.
yeah,
You know,
or a performer. Yeah,
not for me, but for you, yes.
Yeah, that's right. It's funny when you said you shot that stuff. You were just verbatim rip off the comedy you watched. Von Giner and I were talking about this last week about how we would just imitate Steve Martin. I would memorize Steve Martin and just be Steve Martin at school, and people would crack up, and that was the beginning of like, man, this is fun, but nah, I couldn't do this.
It's funny, and I remember I also memorized some Steve Martin, and it led to something my sister, who's 2.5 years older, denies to this day, and I remember it because I gave her credit for it. I used to do the routines all the time, nonstop, and my sister once turned to me and said, you do realize that the things that your friends like most about you, I like least. And it was I can't listen to that routine.
Right.
And I was like, but Jeff likes it, Dave likes it.
Right. Many people come to me and they say, so were you, I'm just looking for your mindset. There's a lot of people watching who, may have a bug in them that they're not listening to and not acting on anyway.
Right.
Your mindset when you said you didn't have the balls, you were playing it safe, and I'm sure it was just sort of eating away at you inside over time, where it was a ticking bomb where you just had to go for it. And
well, I did, and what I did to myself is something I've said it used to be to friends who wanted to change careers or think of graduate school, and now it's their kids who call me. Yeah. That I always think it's a good exercise to. Don't worry about seeming egotistical. Tell yourself, best case scenario, lightning strikes, the path you're on, what does it end up in?
Yeah.
And does that make you happy?
Yeah.
And I was working as what they call a line assistant, a prosecutor, I thought to myself, do I want to be the Attorney General of the United States? Now, no one was ever going to ask me to be the attorney. But I didn't want to do that. Right. And I'm like, why am I on this track that everything goes my way, lightning strikes? And then I thought, or do I want to be a guy like Carl Reiner, not the performer, but the writer creator? Do I want to be a guy like Larry David? And again, no one's mistaking me for someone with Larry David's talent or career, but I was like, that's the world that would charge me. Yeah, and that was really key moment for me, because I thought, why am I busting my ass at a job that's hard and that it's rewarding and it's an honorable career, and I just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And it took me till I was 29 to realize, and I'm going to throw the last 8 years out the window and start over.
Well, it's hard when you're feeling pressure from, your parents, whether they're putting it on you or not, but it's perceived that you don't want to let them down. Correct. And then also your peers, you don't want to put yourself out there and have everybody, tell you, laugh at you. Good luck or whatever.
It was a little different because my friends, and I bet you like yours, because I know they were encouraging. They thought, oh, you should do this.
Yeah.
It wasn't, who can explain exactly the sources of every insecurity? It is a hard, high risk thing to do. But it was my wife who was somebody I knew I trusted and who I knew loved me, who thought I could do it. And it was against her interest. She didn't want to move to Los Angeles. And that registered for me. It was, and I once said to her, do you really think? And she said, well, if I didn't, I would say you should be a journalist, or you should do something
Hey,
else. I don't, law,
I
comedy
want
writer aren't the only two choices in the world.
I want to point something out to you. I don't know if you can see these comments at the
No.
bottom.
Yeah.
Hey, Banicki, are you seeing these?
I'm just now looking. Richie told me that AG story 10 years ago, and then wrote a letter to get me into grad school. Well, that's good. And
There you
see,
go.
I'm consistent.
Yeah.
Adam, you know, and you've done me proud, and Mike too. He used to work at the show. His first job in Hollywood, I think.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you're touching on a lot of good stuff. Like it's that it really is okay. I got a lot of comfort where I am. There's safety in it. You mentioned safety, the word safety net earlier, and man, it's nice. It's easy. I'm gonna miss this place if I ever do it. But then when you really think about it, when you're putting your head on the pillow, it's like, what am I doing? It's like, I got to do this. And
entirely. And then it led to, I started at The Simpsons back in January of 94.
Talking to Richard Appel tonight. Talking to Richard Appel, who runs Family Guy currently, for anyone who's just turning in. Keep going.
And the guy who ran the show at the time always had all the writers in one room sitting in a half moon around his desk. There were 15 people. And as a fan, The Simpsons had been on for maybe 3 or 4 years. And I knew the names of the people in the room. And I had a 10-week contract, and I just felt mute. I didn't, you know, and then it was constantly like, I was going to say that they said, or I'll never say anything that funny. But I wasn't talking for like the first few weeks. And I literally thought the only honorable thing to do is to resign. I should walk in and say, I don't just, and I said that to a person who was becoming a friend there. And he said, no, you're doing it exactly the right way. You come in, you've got to pick up the stuff.
Yeah.
You shouldn't think you have all the answers. And I felt reassured. And then about 4 weeks later, he came to me and said, it's like week 8.
Yeah.
You better start talking.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
your deal is up in 2 weeks. And then but for the first 7 weeks, I barely said a word in that room. It was overwhelming. And
that's smart. And you know, as I've said on these things before, kind of like your ambition, your drive, whatever, and then the world outside. I mean, this is a dialogue. You can't just say, I want to be president, and you're president. You have to negotiate what's out there. You have to be aware of how things work, the world or a comedy room, and you go for it. And when I first moved to LA when I was 24, I was so shy. My head was low. I was listening. I did a little bit of stand-up. I did some improv classes, but I was not going out, you know, hustling like, let me get the best agent I possibly can. You got to just like go figure out the lay of the land and then pick your points, which you started to do in the last couple of weeks. And how did that go?
Well, then it went, you know, and I now know, having run shows, that you don't expect the world from the brand new writer who's been doing this for some total of 10 weeks. And I think he always thought he was going to give me those 20 weeks to prove myself. And I did, but it wasn't like, you know, in that first year, I thought, well, I am at the top of this heap. No. And there were some really, to this day, some of the quickest and smartest and funniest people I've ever worked with. And you do learn from them. And I know that one of the reasons the guy who hired me, who I'll always be grateful to, he himself had an engineering background. And he liked the idea of getting someone who hadn't spent years at a lot of sitcoms he didn't even like, that he thought, there's the greatest talent pool in this room, I feel, and let him try to play in this park and see if he can do it, because he's going to learn what he needs to learn from these guys, and we'll shape him. And so, you know, but I don't.
Who were some of the guys? Who were some of the big hitters in there?
Let's see. Mike Scully, who went on to run the show for a long time and work on things like Parks and Rec, and now has Duncanville on Fox. Brent Forrester went on, who was always really talented. The great George Meyer, who was kind of the standard bearer for everything in that room, supremely talented. Al Jean and Mike Reese were consultants. They had run the show and they were still around. Bill Oakley, Josh Weinstein, who then ran the show for part of the time I was there. Greg Daniels was in the room. But it was Jace Richdale. There were just a lot of really talented people.
Yeah, so it must be, yeah, it's kind of like stepping into your favorite major league team's lineup all of a sudden.
Yeah, and my second year, my contract was staff writer, and then it was going to become story editor. And the other person who was hired with me was a writer named Jennifer Crittenden, who's become and has remained a friend all these years and has had a spectacular career. Most recently at Veep for a number of years, but also worked at Seinfeld. And we both were thinking, okay, the people above us are supervising producers. God knows what that is. In 1 year, we're going to be in charge of editing all the stories.
Yeah.
No one had
Right.
given me any cheat sheet on what the hell
The titles meant.
or what my job was. And then I later learned that the new people always got all the crappy publicity assignments, like TV Guide has Homer Simpson's top 10 Christmas wish list. And I mean, if I tell you it took me 8 hours over 3 days to craft what I now see that like Family Guy will do with 3 of us in a room in 15 minutes. And it'll be, and we'll like it. It won't, but I was like, this is my chance, and if I fuck it up, Matt Groening's going to be reading that week's TV Guide and think, who did this? And
so you were in the position where you had a kid, and you had the support of your wife, but the kid, they were 2,000 miles away, 2,500 miles away.
Yes.
So that must have been, there's a thing when you're away on business that it's good that you had the extra time. Like, you probably worked overtime once you got back to your hotel or apartment.
Without a doubt. And I was able, because again, I could take a red eye, and I did get weekends, and then they let me, when I wrote a script, I could have 3 weeks back east. So I had time. But it's a huge, in a way, there's one lump of guilt that you're not together. It's not a guilt every day, because every day was actually the opposite. And if we had to work till 10 or 11, which we did most nights, I was like, I'm not disappointing anyone at home, and I can spend my weekend. Back then, we would go. Brent Forrester, I remember very nicely in my first couple of months, he would go in on weekends and get the VHS tapes of old Simpsons and watch them, because there were you couldn't get them anyplace else. And it was one of those other reminders and lessons of, like, if you want to write for the show, watch it again and again and again, and start deconstructing how are they telling stories and what is the scaffolding behind it. And so I could spend a weekend afternoon doing that without, feeling guilt. And then my son, who, just on his own found The Simpsons, and it became his touchstone for everything. And his mom, who, despite being progressive politically, a writer herself, kind of was in the Barbara Bush camp back in the day of thinking The Simpsons is not a good influence, and she really didn't want him to watch it.
Wow.
And I used to argue and say and only a couple of years ago, he's now 26, did he say to me, Dad, up until I was 10, literally everything I did in my life, I modeled on Bart Simpson. I was like, nobody actually models their life. He said, everything I did, I thought, would Bart Simpson do this? And I was like, you're like the Parents Television Council. You're their poster boy for being influenced by what you see on the screen. But
that's funny. Well, he turned out all right.
He turned out fine.
He's what, mid-20s?
26. Yeah.
Yes, and he's working in the industry doing comedy.
He's a writer, and will soon be hired as a writer. He's worked as a writer's assistant, which I remember when I was a prosecutor, but I decided, okay, now I'm going to start writing. I would go to coffee shops I wrote in longhand, and there was a coffee shop that I liked that it wasn't very crowded. It was next to a museum in New York. And I used to sit there and nurse the same cup of coffee for maybe 7 hours. I bought one cup of coffee. And there was one moment when, I had to go to the bathroom. So I turned to this elderly woman next to me, and I had just like the remnants, but nothing left in the coffee cup. And I said, will you just watch my stuff for me while I run to the bathroom? She said, sure. And I came back, and of course, all my stuff had been stacked neatly. The table wiped down. And the woman looked at me and said, I'm so sorry. I told them a writer was working there.
Nice.
And I looked at her, and I was like, tears were welling in my eyes. Like, no one had called me a writer. I didn't see myself as a writer. And I'd use that story to tell people, you don't become a writer when you're first paid to do it, because it might take a decade. It might take, who knows? You're a writer when it's the most important thing to you and you devote your time to it.
Yeah.
You know, but I'll never forget that. And, you know,
there you go.
I dated her briefly. She was about
Yeah.
79 and we had a little fling because I
Why
was
not?
so grateful. I was
Yeah.
so grateful.
Yeah. And you just kept, when she was bent over the barista stand.
You know, Mike, the details that I tell you in private do not have to be aired.
Yeah. And she, call me a writer again.
Yes.
Yeah. So, so then you landed on The Simpsons. How long were you with The Simpsons, and then you went to King of the Hill?
I was there for about 4.5 years, and then I went to King of the Hill for about 3.5 years, and then did a couple of live action shows. And while I was at King of the Hill, there was not enough room on the Fox lot, and King of the Hill was in a sleek office tower in what's called Century City, which is
I know that. That's where the first Family Guy office was.
Well, when Family Guy had its pilot table read, were you there for that?
Yeah.
Well, so was I, because an executive at the studio I knew came to our writer's room and said, will you guys come and watch this pilot table read? We don't have enough people. We need to fill it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I was rolling my eyes and went into the room, and I sat in one of the front row seats. And I know this sounds like one of those cliche stories, and I wasn't even this kind of guy who was looking to be resentful. But I looked at the table and thought, literally, whose kid is sitting at the table?
Yeah.
And as it got closer and closer to 10:30, I was like, when are they going to kick him out of that seat? And it started, of course, that was Seth, who was 23 at the time and looked like he was about 17.
Yeah.
And you could, I mean, I already have the job, so I don't have to say this, but it was electric when his vocal performances back then were on that level that they are today. I mean, he's only gotten more sophisticated at it, but you could just see.
Yeah.
And it was kind of astounding. And the other story about my past with Seth is when we were in New York, because when I would go to New York, I was a very present dad because I hadn't seen my son for a while, and he was at a preschool, and a lot of the parents didn't do the play dates, but I did. And one of the nannies for one of his friends was a really lovely young woman in her 20s, early 20s. And I remember we were at the Chelsea Piers, which had a bowling alley.
Mm-hmm.
And it was maybe my son's birthday party. And she came up to me and said, I know you write for The Simpsons, right? And I said, yes. And she says, well, my older brother has sold a cartoon to Fox too. Could I have him? And I remember consciously thinking, Jesus Christ. But I said, of course you can give him my number.
Was it Rachel?
That was that. I'd forgotten all about it. When I first came to Family Guy in 2007 for a season before I left again, by the recording booth, sitting on the couch, waiting to record for American Dad, I walked by and Rachel looks at me and she says, I know you. And I said, I know you're, and in that instant, I was like, wait, the brother you were talking about.
Yeah.
And I said, he never called. And I said, maybe Rachel, you should have told me to call him. And, but I vividly remember thinking, I'm giving her my number. Of course he can call me, but
going out on a limb, giving a 20-something-year-old nanny your number, just going out on a limb.
I just said, here you are. And there's a reason she asked, everyone. She asked for, I'm giving it for professional sibling assistance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you wrote on King of the Hill, and then did you come to, what did you do between that and Family Guy? You were on a deal, right?
I created a show that was on NBC called AUSA that was about loosely my life at the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York, a comedy.
Okay.
And it was with Scott Foley, who had just come off of Felicity. And that's, of course, the wonder of television, that I could write a part based on myself and cast 6'2" waspy heartthrob from Felicity, Scott Foley.
There you go. I'm talking with Rich Appel, everybody, in case you're just tuning in. Rich Appel, my longtime friend, co-creator of The Cleveland Show and current showrunner of Family Guy, talking about his journey into showbiz and in showbiz.
Uh-oh.
Are you freezing up? Am I freezing up?
Now you were freezing up, and now I see you.
Okay.
And I was going to say, your followers might recognize me from the drunken photo of me you posted to
Okay.
advertise tonight. And I specifically remember that was at the Cleveland show premiere.
Oh,
And I
what? Okay,
remember
that's right. Yeah.
everyone was really happy and everyone kept giving me drinks. I mean, it
Yeah.
was just another celebration. And I remember staggering out of there thinking, God, I shouldn't have driven.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And I didn't drive home.
the end of that, I do distinctly remember the end of that night. May or may not have passed a joint around with Mr. Kanye West
Yeah.
and a bunch of other folks that everyone knows.
Kanye West, Mike and I have great stories about Kanye, who was a huge fan of Seth's and Family Guy, and then was before it ever aired, fan of the Cleveland show. He was enthusiastic about it, and we'd heard that. So while we were working on the first season before it aired, because we're so far in advance in animation, we came up with the part for Kanye and pitched it first to his manager, and he liked it and got Kanye on the phone. We pitched it to him. And he then did, I think, like maybe 3 appearances on the show.
Yeah.
And every single time, unlike most guest stars, came to the table read.
Yeah.
When he was scheduled to record at noon, he showed up at 11:59 with
Yeah.
no entourage.
Yeah.
And could not have been a bigger fanboy, wanted to meet the artists.
Yeah.
And we would take the way the Cleveland Show and Family Guy, the offices are laid out. It's offices around the perimeter and then, dozens of carols with the artists. And he wanted to meet, and I said, I'm going to take you to the character designer for you. And I just remember walking up to this carol and just kind of knocking on the little half, wall and saying, hey, Joe, it's Kanye West, who then took, and I did that to about 6 or 8 artists, and the look on their faces, like no preamble, no warning that Kanye West was going to stop by.
Yeah.
But I remember and I don't have despite appearances, a ton of street cred, but I remember when we were designing his character, he said, we showed it to him, and his only note was, he said, no, if it's a collar shirt, no chain. T-shirt, chain, collar, no chain. And I was like, all right.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I thought hoodie, T-shirt, never, of course, not a collared shirt with a hoodie too.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that was another thing you might have said. But yeah, he was very cool. And I think I told you this about, I guess, was it was about a year ago, maybe. Sarah and I and Josie, my daughter, we all went out to one of his Sunday services out in Calabasas.
You did mention that, yeah.
What a trip, man. It was in the middle of nowhere. There were 200 people there, and 100 of them were singers and musicians, just full-throated gospel in the middle of nowhere. And, the guy can generate energy and generate, he can make you want to jump out of your body in a good way.
I don't remember if it might have been your line or either one of the writers at the Cleveland show, both of whom are now at Family Guy, Travis Bowe and Kevin Bacon's. Because after he recorded once, we sat up by those couches and he said, I want to perform for you one of the songs from my new album. I forget, but it was one of his big albums that had not yet dropped. And he started this rap, and we're all like mesmerized. And there's like 5 of us in this small group. And we're thinking, Kanye West is performing live for us.
Right.
And then he did the next one. And then he did the next one.
Right.
And it became clear that he was going to perform this entire album up close, like 5 feet away. And it was either, I don't know, it wasn't my life. It was one of those guys who's like, you remember the exact moment when it goes from, this is the coolest thing I've ever how do I get out of here?
Right.
Because it was just too intense. And you can't have a close-up nodding appreciation for anyone for an hour as they sing at you. But he's an unusual guy. I mean, obviously. And
incredible talent. Hey, Stephen Asante. That's as close to Herbert as I can get. Hey, Stephen Asante. All right. So Cleveland show, like I don't really talk too much about how that started, but I remember Seth coming back from a meeting at Fox, basically saying, they want a Family Guy spinoff. And then sort of everyone looked at me and started, saying Cleveland, whatever. And so Seth and I, and approached you, and I think we just all sat down and just, let's do this. And then for just a few weekends, we sat in Seth's office or went to his house, and he drew the characters out.
Right.
And we
But
went and
my experience was for the first few meetings, which were in Seth's Family Guy office, I remember talking through it all and trying to think. And I know you had obviously some very defined good ideas about it, but we all were. And then at some point he said, well, all right, starting next week, we should probably just meet at my house and we'll bang out the script. And I remember not only thinking, but saying,
yeah,
wait, are we creating
yeah,
the show? No one had said it to me. I didn't assume it. You know, I thought, honestly, Seth was thinking, oh, he's done King of the Hill. He's done, he can give us some good structural tips on what we're doing. And then we went and wrote the pilot over a course of weekends at his house, starting at 9 in the morning.
Yeah, I remember he had a big projector. It was the whole script was on the wall. Yeah, and what a trip! And I
will tell your followers, one of, you know, not to embarrass Mike, but you know, Mike is at the level I've worked with, you know, the best in the business. You know, Harry Shearer, Hank Azaria, Dan Castellaneta at The Simpsons, Seth, Alex Borstein, and Mike. And to be the thing that we didn't have at The Simpsons, and I think now Dan Castellaneta is at least a part-time writer there. But up until I was at Family Guy, I never had the privilege and the advantage of having the actor who does, and it was the same with the Cleveland show, but to be writing the pilot with three of us when two of the three of us were first-class actors doing all of the characters that because Seth was a character but he would also, obviously Seth and Mike do all sorts of subsidiary characters. So it was really an audio track of what that show was from day one of writing it, which is an unusual thing. It's like if you could write Friends with Jennifer Aniston and David Schwimmer in the room, that's going to help the writers get the voices of those characters.
Yeah, and when Family Guy came back from cancellation for seasons 4, 5, 6, to me that was just primo. And you know, with Seth in the room, Alex Borstein was in the room, and then you know, Alex Sulkin had just come on with Wellesley and Viner, and you know, and just to have everyone pitching in character, it was great.
And I will tell you, I had, as you know, 2/3 of the season at Family Guy, long before the Cleveland, well, not that long, but before the Cleveland show, and then went over to American Dad. Those 7 months were another one when I think back of that Simpsons writer's room, and it's, you know, that near original state when I was first there. But like you said, Alec and Wellesley and you and Mark Henneman and Steve and Seth, it was, and Patrick, there was just Patrick everywhere you looked, and not just really quick, funny guys, but people who, and this is something I always value, I mean, it's not such an original thought, but people whose sensibilities were 20% this way or 30% that way from my own, which is so satisfying. Because you think, even after you've been doing this for 15 years, which I had been at the time, I am learning things. And this is a whole nother, it's not even, you're not even saying it's another level, though it was at a high level. It's just, it's a different color and different, and it was so satisfying, and I didn't want to leave. It was really that was
how it was at the beginning of Family Guy for me. Just learning from all the folks in the room, you know, Seth, we're just watching Seth figure all this stuff out, basically. You know, Seth mostly, and then, you know, guys like Ricky Blitt were just had this hilarious, odd sensibility, and you know, Chris Sheridan was in there, and Neil Goldman and Garrett Donovan back in the day, and you know, I would I would just steal their bits and bring them home to my friends, you know. But expanding.
I stopped. Unlike you, I stopped stealing bits when I was 12.
It's
but you go right on ahead.
No. I don't need to steal them anymore. But what I was going to say is, it's easy when you're with your buddies because you're all on the same wavelength. You know, they're your friends for a reason. You kind of have a similar worldview, and it's easy to be funny with your buddies, which I kind of always was. And then, you know, in college, and then for a year after, you know, there was a common frame of reference and I could be funny. But then when I went to LA and then was trying to do stand up, it's you got to relate to everybody.
Right.
And that's a big challenge. And that's another one of those keep your ears open before you talk too
Or
much.
it's that you got to relate to everyone, or just write for Family Guy, and then you're still talking to your buddies back in, Virginia.
Right. Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, that's
You know, a couple people are asking about, you know, or somebody just gave a nice compliment that these interviews should be transcribed. I actually have a YouTube channel that I'm setting up very actively right now, and all of these interviews that I've done the whole month will be up in the next day or two, and I'll make an announcement to point people toward that tomorrow. So this gold from people like my friend Rich here, Rich Appel, runs Family Guy, came up with The Simpsons, came up through The Simpsons. You didn't come
yeah.
up with The Simpsons.
No, no.
And how great is Matt Groening? Like what a
He's terrific, and by the time I
he
met
came
him,
up with The Simpsons.
he came up with The Simpsons, and by the time I met him, obviously, since The Simpsons was a phenomenon from season 1 on, he was already Matt Groening. And I became friends with him. He's the same today as he was then, which I assume is how he always has been, because he is really laid back, totally unpretentious.
Yeah,
Like Seth, a guy who reads a lot, is interested in the world, is funny in manner, but just very low key
yeah,
and extremely approachable. He's not, there's nothing about him that would shout out, oh, he created maybe the most successful TV show in history.
yeah. Humble. Cosmic Titan here is asking, what advice would you have for someone pitching a show for 20th?
That's a very specific piece of advice. I'm curious who Cosmic is. I would have the same advice I would have for anyone who's pitching a show,
Yeah,
which is the best preparation you can have is to practice your pitch. And you get over your inner voice that tells you, and then I'll say, okay, I know that. No, say
right.
it out loud. Say it out
Yeah,
loud in the car and do it 10 times.
yeah,
Because the next best thing I can tell you, but not everyone can do this and it's okay, the less you rely on notes and
yep,
pages in front of you, the better. And that will become easier the more times you run it through in your head. And there are a lot, my mom would be thrilled to know that I'm about to say there are some good things about the law that, I took with me. But when you, as I did, do trial after trial, and you're doing opening statements and closing statements, and they're just like they are on Law and Order, except 100 times longer. You have, of course, the note, but you're trying to persuade literally 12 people who are staring at you. And if you're not looking at them, if they can't see your eyes, they know, well, I'm not going to trust you. And so you quickly learn. I have some bullet points in my head, and it was great training for pitching because you realize the same thing you'd realize, and this person would realize, if they run through their pitch out loud in real time. And if you flub something, you don't start over. You keep going, because then when you do it, you'll know, which will give you confidence, that if you flub in the same way you did in the car or walking the dog, you remember how you got out of that. You've already thought of a little joke or something to back or way back into your. So to me, it's making sure you've rehearsed it.
yeah.
And then you can still seem conversational, and then don't get into the weeds. Introduce the
That's for
world
later.
and what you think is going to be interesting about it, and and then talk about the characters. And Greg Daniels said to me something 20 years ago that I'm sure others have said, but when I heard it, I think Greg was ahead of the curve. And this is for writers who know what I'm, who are in TV, who would know. He always said that the best thing to do is to sell a show that has a high concept sound, but that lives in low concept. And that, there are a lot of shows, I won't mention them, that have failed, where it might be, I'll give one, it's going to be real time over the first date. And people, oh, that's interesting. Well, when you actually then think 22 episodes, so one of the episodes is at 3:15 a.m.
Right.
And they can't, it's all that same day, so nothing's developed. But any show, if you think of the best sitcoms that we like, you know, from Seinfeld and Cheers and whatever the shows are, 98% of the chance is they're just workplace comedies at a bar, at an office for The Office, or family in the living room.
Right.
And because you're going to write 100 episodes. So I wouldn't break my back thinking, you know, the first ear doctor on the moon. It's like, okay, you know, whatever.
Right.
But so that would be my advice.
Cool. I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, I could sing.
You know,
I could
the
sing,
same thing. Yeah, I think the same is true whenever you're speaking. I mean, if you're obviously acting for, you know, going for an audition, you say the lines out loud. Actually, we have table reads for every episode. I'll still not just read through my script beforehand. I will say every line out loud beforehand. So it trains you're trained, your brain.
And I have a much less, you know, talent-based role at table reads often, which is to read the stage directions. But I do the same. I read them out loud, you know, because you'll be better. And the other rule is, I'm sure anybody who's ever prepared a school report without doing that thinks, oh, I've got 15 minutes easy. And by minute 3, you're done. Right. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like you don't know until you've timed yourself out and heard yourself say the words, and they don't seem so scary.
Right. And frankly, it's why I tell people to go ahead and shoot their stuff. If you have the wherewithal to shoot whatever you've written in short form, usually do it, because it's going to change from your brain to the page to the screen. And
I would say
see it through.
And you know, you have more followers than I, and anybody who is interested in comedy, I'm the 80,000th person to say this, but the world has changed, and Mike and I at the Cleveland show, and I to this day will hire people based on things other than traditional scripts. We do like to read but if the script is okay, but they've got 3 short skit-like web things, or a short 2-minute movie that are great, or even a link to their stand-up. I mean, there's so many other ways to get your content out there. You know, people relied on scripts because nobody could go watch you perform in Chicago or San Francisco or see your little whatever you did, or even your school film, because how did you get to them? But now they can.
I mean, if somebody hands me a script and somebody sends me a link to watch a video, well, you know, which one are you going to do? And I had never written anything longer than a 5-minute sketch when I was hired, but that was sort of the nature of Family Guy. Part of the DNA was just, you know, cutaway gags. And so I was really high.
Well, I've always said, and I feel confident in this, that when you're hiring writers, you hire 98% for the voice. Because the fact is, I was taught a lot about storytelling and structure. You can teach things like that, but you can't shout at someone, be more original. Right. Come up with a voice on the page that I can't write. No, that's a talent that you nurture. And then you say to somebody, the second act break makes no sense. The story goes nowhere. Here's how we can take it somewhere. And a lot of good writers will then learn exactly how to do that.
Right.
So I've read many scripts, not many, but some scripts of people who I've hired who've gone on to have, unsurprisingly, great careers, because there were moments in the script that were just so original, and the voice was so original, even if I felt like, wait, nothing happened in that act, or there was no conflict. Okay.
Right.
Add conflict, or, you know.
Right. So no, I got you. Yeah, you can always learn. You can learn the skills as you practice.
Right.
The voice is the voice.
Exactly.
Well, cool, man. So what's people are asking about season 19 of Family Guy? Just sort of waiting for an official pickup one day, or what's
yes,
up?
Season 19 will premiere in the end of September, early
October.
Season
20. Yeah,
so we're way ahead. So we're busy. Most of season 19 is in some state of animation. It's a year-long process, as I'm sure people who follow you know.
I recorded in my daughter's closet today.
With a blanket over his head.
Yep, had blankets everywhere and got it as quiet as I could. And you know, I'm watching the meter reading on this recorder, and I'm performing, and I'm holding a blanket, and
yeah, so it's
stressful.
But it's amazing because Family Guy, The Simpsons, Bob's Burgers, you know, Big Mouth, all these shows are pretty much the only shows that are still in full production. We have, I know, 140 people. Every single one of them is gainfully employed, and we set everyone up remotely, rented editing equipment. The writers meet, you know, on Zoom, and so we haven't missed a beat. So we're just waiting. It's a contractual process for the network and the studio, but Family Guy will continue.
Yeah, and an incredible flash of, or whatever, of good fortune that we can keep rolling. It's it's pretty miraculous, and it's, you know, it's humbling. I mean, we've talked about this being a time of sort of renewal and the earth taking a breath and all that kind of stuff. It's easier for us to sort of get on our, you know, whatever, or whatever you want to call it. But, you know, a lot of people are not as fortunate. And I think, you know, as long as you can always stay aware, you know, then you're good. Because I don't like it when people don't seem to understand all that. But
no, I'll my own experience, because we're not yet working on season 20, but we're still doing some rewrites on season 19. And regardless of having a job and knowing that you're not going to worry about that for all the people who work for us, you often forget how important that kind of contact is. And before we kind of started back doing some of these things, I was in a lot harder place, because I was going a little stir crazy, not just by being in the same room over and over, but seeing nobody. And now if you have 4 or 5 hours where you're, you know, looking at 5 other faces and making each other laugh and talking about stuff, it's that kind of human contact that's necessary. So you win twice when your job is intact, because you still get paid and you get to see people who make you feel connected to the world.
Right, and that is the thing that I miss when I'm not in LA or not in the room, is just how frickin' funny it is. You know, it's like athletes say they'll miss the camaraderie the most when they retire, or whatever. It is so true, because it is everyone saying the most horrible things to and about each other, and it is just hilarious.
Yes, it is. People always say you must have a lot of fun, and that's always one of the first questions. And I always just say, I do. It is fun. It sounds like fun, and it is fun. Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, this thing's going to cut us off in a moment.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. A lot of fun.
Yeah, Richie Rich. So Rich Appel, you should follow him if you don't already. And he's a funny guy, and he's the guy. He's the glue. He really part of the glue. Alex Sulkin and I are glued together, not at loggerheads, but we run the show together. A Family Guy movie, I have to say, is going to happen at some point. There's a mention of that. And so I will just say, sort of in closing here, I mentioned before, all of these interviews that I've been doing over the last month are being posted on my YouTube channel, which I will have more information on tomorrow night. But all this stuff's going to be up. Rich's interview right now. This one will be up certainly early next week. And planning a little bit more excitement for all of this, but I'm trying to figure some things out before I talk about it too much.
Will it be available to the Library of Congress? Can we get it there?
Yes, absolutely.
That's my only request.
Yes, but it will be in the bathroom there.
It's something.
So, and I also mentioned that I might do one of these Friday afternoon, but I'm not going to do that. I don't have to do that.
If you saw his house, you'd understand why.
No, shut up. Come on now. We're not going to talk about it.
Anyway, stop.
So tomorrow night, I've got the lovely Adrienne Palicki and her hubby, Scott Grimes, are going to join me together.
That's a nice double bill.
Yeah, that should be a good one. And of course, we all fell in love with Adrienne and
Kim Riggins.
And Riggins on Friday Night Lights back in the day. And so that'll be fun tomorrow night. And Rich, I appreciate all you do.
My pleasure. I love working with you, Mike.
Yeah, right back at you.
Soon.
Well, have a great night and stay sane out there. You got 3 more hours of day than we do here, and really appreciate you,
and
brother.
Because it's early, I didn't even have to skip Survivor tonight for this, so I'm happy.
Sweet. All right. We're down in 3, 2. Good night, everyone. Thanks, Richie. Love you, man. Bye-bye.